Welcome to the Know. I'm Meg Turney.
I'm Ashley Jenkins.
For years, researchers have tried and failed to prove that playing violent video games makes you a mass-murdering psychopath. But very little research has been done into why we enjoy killing dudes made of pixels.
According to a new study performed by Australian researchers and reported by GameZone, it might be because of sexy reasons. If taking down an online opponent has ever caused you to pop one, well, suddenly all your questions have been answered. But you might want to get that checked out, because it's a little bit weird.
While the research didn't talk about that particularly disturbing scenario, it did seem to find a strong link between playing violent video games and the desire for sex.
Hey.
And before you start saying, oh, they probably sampled a few people for their research, this is actually a fairly large sampling of 2 studies with 500 subjects, each men and women, for a total of 1,000 subjects.
Not too bad. First, the researchers asked the lab rats, or lab people if you want to get all PC about it, what 5 games they were playing and just how violent they felt those games actually are. Then they got to the sexy talk. How important is sex to you? How likely are you to engage in sex? Is there a more boring way to ask that question? Your preferences for casual sex, so on. And lastly, how you perceive your mate value, which is just a fancy way of saying how desirable you find yourself to the opposite sex, whether or not you're a good catch.
I bet Blaine is off the charts with his mate value. The results of the study showed that the men and women whose games of choice tended to be more violent indicated that sex was more important to them than other respondents. And not only that, but the mate value perception greatly differed between men and women who played violent video games. The study indicated that women in particular who play violent video games view themselves as sexier and probably a better romantic partner.
So, hey.
What up, fellas? And ladies.
The researchers repeated the same study with the same sample size of different people and got basically the same exact results, leading them to conclude that there is a link between violent video games and sex, or sex drive, or sex things. And interestingly enough, it's different for men and women. Of course, this study doesn't draw any conclusions about why women feel sexier when they engage in digital murder. That's just for all of us to argue about.
It's just so hot.
Blood looks good on me.
While we won't risk going into that quagmire by speculating ourselves, except
Sure
for what we just did, it is nice to see research being done into violent video games that isn't trying to show video games as rotting our brains. For years, gamers have had to fight against this misconception by critics who are always calling studies to validate the prejudices they have against a hobby they simply do not understand.
It's gotten to the point where the most recent edition of the DSM, that is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness, I know it's a sexy term, now classifies internet gaming addiction as a condition which requires more study. The DSM is basically the American Psychiatric Association's Bible for classifying mental illness, so that is a pretty big deal. While we're not disputing that this is a legitimate condition, the APA comes just shy of laying this burden at the feet of online video games themselves, saying the gaming prompts a neurological response that influences feelings of pleasure and reward, and the result in the extreme is manifested as addictive behavior.
Rather than blaming games as a whole, more research has come out recently stating that people with a penchant for compulsive gaming might literally have their brains wired a bit differently than others. A University of Utah study of 200 South Korean boys who were believed to have internet gaming addictions found that brain scans showed greater connectivity between different pairs of brain networks. These connections could make them hyperreactive to new information, which is great for playing games, but could also lead to poor impulse control, resulting in some of the unfortunate stories we've all heard about addicted gamers not eating for days on end.
I don't care about the gamers, I care about the stories about the babies.
I know, they always leave the babies.
We've also seen recently that playing 3D games, that's a game that operates in 3 dimensions, not playing games with glasses, can lead to an increase in memory retention. Last month, the University of California, Irvine conducted a study with non-gamers, which had them playing games for 30 minutes a day. One group played 2D games, while the other group played 3D games, and performed memory tests after 2 weeks. The gamer group that played 3D games showed a 12% memory boost, while the 2D group showed 0. See, that's why we loved Mario 64 so much.
So good. And Mario Maker is probably just going to make you mad forgetful. Last week saw the release of another cool new study about the roles that video games could play in education, with game advocates pushing for video games to play a lead part in reforming education. Researcher Richard E. Mayer looked into how games can provide cognitive benefits in learning.
While Mayer concluded that maybe video games shouldn't be our primary teaching method, he did find the games to have a number of features that substantially improve student learning. Putting words in a conversational style, putting words in a spoken style, adding prompts to explain key points in games, adding explanations at key points in a game, and adding pre-game activities that explain the components of a game. All these together led to better performance in retaining information. Also, I'm pretty sure that playing video games was the highlight of my physics class We played Roller Coaster Tycoon. I didn't learn shit about physics, but I had a great time in that class.
Dude, I played Zoom Beanies. I didn't learn anything, but it was sure fun.
Was it 2D?
It actually
There you
operated in
go.
2D space. It's like 2.5D.
Science.
We knew it. Mayer also found that first-person shooter games and puzzle games lead to an overall improvement in specific cognitive skills. So we should all be playing more Portal and Minecraft instead of learning about Texas history, which is, you know, a real thing here in Texas.
Wow. While we've been hearing about the positive effects of gaming for some time, it's nice to see that a less skeptical approach to gaming is the new normal, especially now that people who grew up playing games were the ones moving into the research fields. Hopefully research will be fueled less by critics of games who want to know what's happening to their teenagers' brains, and more by people who understand the hobby and have experienced its positive benefits firsthand.
Yes, the early 2000s were primarily dominated by people trying to unearth all the ways video games were bad for our brains.
Like rock music.
But now that just as much as half of Americans play video games, the public is generally more open to the idea of gaming rather than fighting against it, the boom it's seen over the past decade. Last year, an APA task force combed more than 170 studies about violent video games to find a link between games and aggression, and came up completely empty-handed, bitches.
Suck it. Okay.
Yes.
To which the rest of us gamers have been saying for years, no shit. And while that doesn't mean we won't find any other negative effects of video games and other mediums in the future, it's nice to know that it's not the main thrust of much of this research the way it used to be. Instead, it's all about actual thrusting.
It's actual thrust, yeah.
It's been trending this way for a while now, and let's hope for more studies about what the games that we choose or how we react to them reveal about our own patterns.
It's like a personality test.
Journey of self-discovery.
Yes. Or like Journey. Never mind. All right, what's really weird about all this research of bad media causing bad behaviors is that it seems like it should be the opposite. Just like the Australian study about how people who have higher interest in sex might be playing more violent video games, maybe what type of movies, video games, and music you enjoy says more about you than the actual medium.
Is it entirely unthinkable that we gravitate toward art that echoes something going on inside us rather than the art creating behaviors and placing them there? We got a little bit deep for a story about sex and violence in
Let's
video
talk more
games,
about
but
humping.
hey, much like the University of Utah study showing that addicted gamers might have an underlying neurological issue as opposed to a video game generating the issue, presumably through a day one patch or something.
Yes, I'll take a patch for my neurological issues, thanks. Wow, that hits so close to home, Eddie, you don't even know. Someone should really get to work on all those day one patches.
Before we get a little too deep for everyone on a Friday, what do you guys think of all this video game research? Do you think there's merit to the Australian research about violent games and sex, or is that just like a Aussie thing? Would you take a mate value patch?
For more on the latest game research and studies, like this video and subscribe to the know.
All about sex and violence.
Just hump.
So the fact that I like movies pretty much exclusively with explosions and races and stuff says that I'm very sexy.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, it says that you think you're more sexy than
Hold
women
on.
who don't like action games.
Hold on.
Slow-mo.